What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Thursday night football ends in dramatic fashion. The Rams get the 30-20 win over the Minnesota Vikings in controversial fashion because, let's be honest, that was an obvious face mask penalty that went uncalled. And these referees continue to ruin these games. Like, the NFL has to do something about this. You should at least have the ability to review certain plays where a penalty went uncalled. Because if the Vikings had a home field advantage for this game, they easily could have got that call overturned and a penalty flag thrown, because all you had to do was throw some beer cans and water bottles on the field, and the referees would have threw a flag on the play like how they did last week in Texas versus Georgia. But we're in the year 2024, and these coaches don't have the ability to throw a challenge flag on certain penalties that don't go called, or the NFL doesn't have the ability to review certain instances like that and overturn it, throw a flag on the play, because a lot of people have their jobs on the line when it comes to these games, man. Coaches get fired depending on their win-loss records, their team's ability to win. And with certain calls like that don't get penalty flags thrown, for a coach who could have been on a hot seat, he could have gotten fired because of that. Because ultimately, his team got cheated out of a chance to win the game. And I'm not saying that Kevin O'Connell is on the hot seat, but I'm just saying, like, a lot of people have their livelihoods, their careers on the line. People bet a lot of money on the NFL. And for referees to just be so blind in a lot of these scenarios where they just throw penalty flags when they shouldn't be called, but they don't throw them when they should be called, just adds for so much inconsistency when it comes to these officiating crews. And it just makes the NFL hard to watch sometimes, and it just ruins the game because people get cheated out of money, opportunities, and career-changing moments due to these officials being so damn blind. But on this episode, I'm going to give my reaction to this game. Also, we're going to hit on Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young. I feel like both of those quarterbacks coming from the 2023 draft class have put both of their franchises in very bad situations. And I got to call out Colorado fans for being a little bit delusional about Deion's future in Boulder. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we go live and drop new content, and let's dive into it. The Los Angeles Rams get a much-needed win, 30-20 Thursday night over the Minnesota Vikings, but in controversial fashion. So Minnesota's defense clutches up, they get a stop, and their offense gets an opportunity to take this game into overtime. But all they had to do was have a 97-yard touchdown drive and the two-point conversion to do so. And unfortunately, they got cheated out of the opportunity to have a chance to tie this game up because the refs are so damn blind that apparently you can be standing right in front of a penalty that should be called and still not call it. And it's funny because Byron Young, after he got the sack and he had the face mask that went uncalled, he knew that should have been a penalty. And he was just as shocked as everybody else that a flag wasn't thrown. You see, these officials, I get that nobody really cares what their names are. We don't really care about the refs until they end up having these moments where they throw a penalty or they don't throw a penalty flag and they alter the outcome of the game. If a flag's thrown, Minnesota might be able to drive downfield and tie this game up. Even if you are a Rams fan, you have to acknowledge that Minnesota got cheated out of an opportunity to win this game potentially. You don't know what could have happened if a flag got thrown on that play, which it should have been, because Minnesota, for all we know, with them having a little bit more space to operate in, not having to worry about giving up a safety, they could have engineered a game-winning drive to potentially get it to overtime, go into OT, and win the game because they got all the momentum at that point. So for the refs to not throw a flag on that play is a really embarrassing moment for the NFL, because you get billions of dollars in revenue every year off this product, and yet you can't give your consumers a better officiating crew, a better viewer experience. Because these bad calls, not only do they ruin the outcome of these games, coaches get fired because of it. You also have other people on the staff who are like assistant coaches who also struggle to provide for their families after the head man gets fired. Because we never think about the assistant coaches when guys lose their jobs who are only making 30, 40,000 a year. We only think about the head man. We don't really feel bad for him because he's getting paid millions. But the guys under him, they suffer the most. And a lot of these games come down to one play, one big moment. And when you have referees who miss calls like this, it's unacceptable, especially if you're going to promote betting on this. I don't want to bet on the NFL or college football right now because the officials are just so doggone inconsistent, and you don't want to have a missed call that ends up forcing you to not be able to cash out on your 5-leg parlay because one idiot referee ends up not calling a penalty that should have been called, and it changes the outcome of what the game should have been. You know, I'm not saying that Minnesota should have won this game. I'm not saying that no call is the reason why they lost. But I am saying that you don't know how this game could have went if that penalty was thrown on that obvious face mask. Because for all we know, Minnesota gets an extra possession and they go downfield and they tie the game up, and maybe they win it in overtime. They got cheated out of an opportunity. The Rams, you're walking away 3-4 now, and it doesn't look like you got any reason to trade anybody. There were talks about Matthew Stafford possibly being traded to the Vikings, even though those were proved to be false. But Cooper Kupp almost got traded to the Chiefs, and it looks like the Steelers are trying to make a move to get him along with a few other teams. But, you know, once this game was over and they cut to Cooper Kupp and Sean McVay on the sideline, it looked like Sean McVay was kind of telling them, hey, man, like, don't worry about all the hoopla that's going on out there. Like, we ain't trading you, brother. Like, you're a Ram for life. Because Cooper Kupp had a really good game. Puka Nacua had a really good game as well. And both of these dudes have missed the majority of the first half of the year. And that was a large reason why the Rams have struggled to win a handful of games. But this was a much-needed win. And it was kind of unexpected because the majority of the public was taking the Vikings to win this game outright and to cover that 3-point spread. And right now, the Rams, with this win, their season, they're right back in it. You're not 2-5, so it isn't any reason to give up any good assets. And I don't see how this team doesn't have a shot to win the NFC West, because the NFC West has not been that good this year. This is probably the second weakest division in the NFL, right behind the AFC South. The NFC South, I think, is a little bit more competitive than the West right now. Well, I can't even say that. Maybe this is like the third best division in the league. I don't really know, but all I know is that for the Rams, with the way this team played tonight with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back, and you're going to get a couple of starters on the offensive line back in a couple of weeks, you're good enough not just to win the NFC West, but you could make a deep playoff run. I still view this team as Super Bowl caliber when everybody's healthy, because Matthew Stafford, this dude is the most underrated quarterback in the history of the league. A lot of people didn't put respect on Stafford's name until he got to the Rams and he won a Super Bowl, even though he's always been a really good quarterback when he was playing for the Detroit Lions. It's just that He got scapegoated a lot because that franchise didn't really have a lot of success. And when they would lose, they always had to blame somebody. And it was always Matthew Stafford couldn't get it done in the fourth quarter. Matthew Stafford, remember, people used to say he used to pat his stats to look better than what he actually was. Well, this dude is a borderline Hall of Famer, if he isn't already. Because to me, I would put him in the Hall of Fame because when you listen to some of the younger quarterbacks in the league talk about QBs who they modeled their game after or who they looked up to, CJ Stroud, Caleb Williams, they both gave a lot of respect to Matthew Stafford. Both of those guys said that he's a top 3 quarterback in the league. Hell, Caleb Williams said that if you don't think Stafford is the best quarterback in the league, he ain't even talking to you. Because a lot of the stuff that we see Patrick Mahomes do, Matthew Stafford has been doing for years. Aaron Rodgers said this a few times on the Pat McAfee show. And it's just really weird to see a guy as good as Matthew Stafford get his roses on the tail end of his career. Because tonight he was balling. He had 4 touchdowns. Yeah, he threw an interception. But that dude was surgical against one of the best defenses in the league. Brian Flores, that dude is a mastermind as a defensive coordinator, and he's given a lot of quarterbacks fits this year, but Matthew Stafford, bro, he was carving that defense up, and this is the second straight week now where when the Vikings have gone up against a high-powered offense, they kind of have struggled a little bit because Jared Goff torched that defense last week, and Ben Johnson was the dude calling the plays on offense for Detroit. So for Minnesota right now, they kind of are hitting one of those stretches during the season where they're starting to crash back down to earth because they started out 5-0. They were looking like a Super Bowl contender. Sam Darnold was an MVP front runner, and you lose 2 straight games. Now you got to ask yourself, is this thing starting to spiral? Is the season going to start going the way that most of us thought it would? And, you know, Minnesota just was a little bit hot to start off, and they're cooling off at the wrong moment. Or can they be able to take these next couple of days to rebound, rethink some things over, and get back to the ways that had them 5-0 to start this season? Because 2 losses, yeah, there's no shame losing to the Rams and the Lions because these are really good teams and they could go as far as anybody else in the playoffs. But, you know, for as good as how the Vikings looked early on, now that they're playing tougher teams, better opponents, they don't look as dominant. And you got to wonder, once you start playing the teams in your division, you got to play Green Bay, you got to play the Bears. Like, you wonder, are you going to be able to win those games? Because if you lose them, they could be the difference between you making it in and missing out on the playoffs. Because the NFC is really tight right now. There's not really a team that has separated themselves from the rest of the bunch. Anthony Richardson has created a civil war amongst Colts fans because you got one half of this fan base who believe that the only way Anthony Richardson is going to get better is by continuing to get meaningful in-game experience. And even if he struggles, the Colts can't bench him because he's only going to get better with more playing time. But you got a second half of this fan base that believe that Anthony Richardson isn't good enough to remain the starter for this team, and he should develop on the bench and behind the scenes in practice. And Joe Flacco should be the starter for the remainder of this season because he's the best quarterback and gives this team the best chance to win. Now, when I have watched Anthony Richardson play this year, I've seen a quarterback that looks like a juiced up version of Tim Tebow than he does looking like a second coming of Lamar Jackson. Because when the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson 3rd overall in 2023, the hope was that Shane Steichen, who is one of the more well-respected offensive minds in the league, could develop Anthony Richardson and turn him into what Lamar Jackson is right now. But he looks more closer to being the next Tim Tebow than he does looking like the next Lamar Jackson. Because when you look at Tim Tebow's 2011 season when he led the Denver Broncos to the playoffs, they got that upset win over the Steelers. He had Demaryius Thomas for the first play of overtime for a touchdown to win it. He went 7-4 that year as a starter. He completed 46.5% of his passes, had a TD-INT ratio of 12-6, and with Anthony Richardson so far throughout this season, He hasn't been anything better than what Tebow was when he was the starter for the Broncos in 2011. He has a 3-6 touchdown interception ratio, and like Tebow, he's completing around 40% of his passes at 48.5%. So if anything, Anthony Richardson is more closer right now to becoming the second coming of Tim Tebow than he is looking like the second version of Lamar Jackson. There are a lot of overlapping similarities between Tim Tebow and Anthony Richardson because both of these guys coming out of college, they were viewed as project players. They were guys that had bad footwork, inconsistent accuracy. They didn't really look like a natural quarterback. And for Anthony Richardson to become the next Lamar Jackson, you're banking on Shane Steichen being able to completely elevate this dude as a passer. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I'm not an Anthony Richardson hater. I like to call myself a truther. Because if Anthony Richardson reaches his full potential, the best he's going to be is a more athletic version of Cam Newton, which would be a really good player. But what we tend to forget about Cam Newton is that he was never a consistent passer. He was never a truly accurate thrower of the football. He only completed 60% of his passes 2 times throughout his entire NFL career. And Anthony Richardson, even if he is able to reach his potential, he's not going to be as good as what Lamar Jackson is throwing the football. He probably is going to be a guy who probably is going to always complete around 60% of his passes or lower. Anthony Richardson just isn't that kind of quarterback that's going to be able to destroy you from the pocket like Lamar can. And right now, Anthony Richardson looks more closer to being the next Tim Tebow than he does looking like the next Lamar Jackson. Tim Tebow, he struggled to throw the football with accuracy. There were several games when this dude only completed like 5-6 passes. And with Tim Tebow in 2011 only completing 46.5% of his passes, and right now so far this season, Anthony Richardson is only completing 48.5% of his passes, this dude looks like he's going to be a more juiced up version of what Tim Tebow is. And I'm hoping that I'm wrong because I really do believe that Anthony Richardson has everything that it takes to be a great quarterback in the NFL. He's a great leader. He's the first one in the building, last guy out, high character guy. Everybody seems to love him. And everybody understood that Anthony Richardson was going to be a project. He wasn't going to be one of those dudes that you sit for a year or you start for a year, then year 2 he was going to take a massive leap. It was always going to be a 2-year or more developmental project for Shane Steichen and that coaching staff when it comes to the development of helping Anthony Richardson mature into one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And right now, early into this thing, it looks really ugly, but the Colts are still finding ways to win despite Anthony Richardson not having consistent performances, because Anthony Richardson has shown flashes of what he could be when he puts it all together. It's not like you're in the same situation that the Panthers are right now with Bryce Young, where you got a guy that hasn't shown you any flashes. Anthony Richardson has had at least 2 or 3 games where he has played some good football. Week 1 against the Texans, he looked really good in that game, and he had a few good performances last year before he got injured. But the problem with the Colts is that you got a player that, despite his great physique, 6'5", 255 pounds, running 4.43, you can't really maximize all of his physical gifts due to his durability concerns. Despite how big he is, you know what they say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. That tends to be true when it comes to Anthony Richardson, because this dude steady gets injured by smaller players. And that has hindered his development because it has taken away meaningful game action that he has needed to help continue to grow and help his development. And right now, I think that the Colts are in dangerous territory when it comes to Anthony Richardson, because he looks really close to being Tim Tebow, but just way more athletic. You know, they say in the NFL, when you miss on a quarterback in the draft, it sets your franchise back several years, and it's hard to bounce back from. And the Carolina Panthers are learning that lesson the hard way with Bryce Young, because When they traded up for Bryce Young, they thought this dude was going to be the answer to their long-term quarterback struggles. Ever since Cam Newton got cut by this franchise, they haven't had stability at the quarterback position. And they mortgaged a lot to trade up for Bryce Young. They gave up DJ Moore, 2 first-round picks, and also a couple of other second-rounders to go along with that. And Bryce Young, up to this point in his career, not only is he one of the biggest busts in NFL history, but he may be the worst quarterback ever drafted in the first round because he's worse than Jamarcus Russell. He has a 2-18 record as a starter. The dude struggles to get the offense past the 50-yard line. And for the Carolina Panthers, it looks like making the decision to draft Bryce Young has nuked this franchise. Not just right now, but in the future as well, because right now, Bryce Young is not a starting caliber quarterback. Hell, I don't even think he's good enough to be a serviceable backup on the majority of NFL teams. So you got a guy that not just is he not good enough to start, but he isn't even backup material. So that means that it's going to be hard to trade him and get some value out of him because most teams aren't going to view him as an asset that really is worth giving up any kind of draft picks for him, maybe a 6-7 rounder at best. So you're stuck in a situation where you got a guy on a rookie deal and he still has a few years left on it until you can cut him and not really have to worry about the financial implications that comes with that. Therefore, if you want to move on from Bryce Young after this season, you probably are going to have to cut him, take a little bit of dead cap, and then you're going to have to once again go back to the same stage that you were at before you took Bryce Young in 2023 because you once again are going to have to draft another quarterback potentially. And you're in a really bad situation right now because with how bad Bryce Young is, you need another quarterback unless you want to run it back with Andy Dalton. Next year's quarterback class is not good unless you like Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. You probably shouldn't draft a quarterback next year, but are you in a position to pass up on a quarterback? Because let's say Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward actually are generational quarterbacks. Is it worth passing up on one of those two guys when you already have PTSD from whiffing on the decision to draft Bryce Young? And here's another thing. Bryce Young has been so bad that when he's on the field, it makes it hard to evaluate how good the team around him is because he holds back the performance of the entire team. And although the Panthers have been a dumpster fire, Bryce Young, being a first overall pick, was expected to be able to overcome situations like this because nobody who gets drafted top 5 in the draft is going to a great situation. You are going to have to overcome some level of dysfunction to succeed. When Cam Newton got drafted first overall by the Panthers in 2011, that wasn't a great situation. But he was able to make the most of it and become the heart and soul of the Panthers franchise for the majority of years that he was the starter. Same thing with Joe Burrow. Everybody talks about how good the receivers are that Joe Burrow has been throwing to, but nobody has talked about how he's one of the only quarterbacks in the history of the NFL to make it to a Super Bowl with the offensive line that gave up the most sacks in the season and allowed him to get sacked 10 times in the playoff game, and yet he was still able to lead them to a win. Not everybody who gets drafted this high goes to a great situation. Andrew Luck, he carried the Colts all the years he was their starter, and they were never really that good. They never really had great offensive lines. They didn't have a stacked group of wide receivers outside of T.Y. Hilton. Andrew Luck didn't really have pretty much anybody at wide receiver who was that good. Bryce Young set this franchise back because now you're scared to want to take the risk and roll the dice on getting another quarterback. You're scared to want to draft a younger quarterback that may require a little bit of development because Bryce Young has been so bad for you that you might want to think twice about drafting one. And another bad situation that the Panthers are in right now is that you got a head coach in Dave Canales where this dude may be in over his head. You may have hired somebody that is probably the worst head coach in the NFL because somehow this team looks even worse this year than what they were last year under Frank Wright, due to Dave Canales being limited in terms of the scheme and what kind of plays he can call, due to Bryce Young not really being able to do anything. He doesn't have a good arm, so you can't call a lot of deep shots because he doesn't have the arm strength to get it there. So all you really can do is call a lot of RPOs and screen passes for Bryce Young, and that's not going to help you win a lot of games and get a lot of yards offensively with him in the game. So you got a head coach in Dave Canales that may be in over his head, plus he's also handicapped with what he has to deal with that quarterback due to Bryce Young not being that good. And that's why the Panthers are reluctant to flat out say that, yeah, Andy Dalton is definitively the better guy, and we're going to roll with him, and we're just going to give up on Bryce Young. Because think about what this team gave up to get Bryce. You gave up DJ Moore, who's one of the best receivers in the NFL right now, and a ton of draft capital that you probably could have used on addressing another big issue that you have, which is on your defense right now. You got the worst defense in the NFL when it comes to performance and talent. Everybody wants to blame Ejiro Evero. You want to fire him, but what is that going to solve? This dude has no pieces to work with. Derek Brown's out. You know, you also got a lot of other starters out. You lose a lot of pieces in free agency like Jeremy Chin, Frankie Louisville. You're basically telling Ejiro Evero to go out there and turn shit into gold pretty much. And with drafting Bryce Young, he just has completely nuked the Panthers franchise, because they're in the spot where there may not be any opportunity for them to climb themselves up out of this hole, at least for the next 3 to 4 years, because you're stuck, because you wasted the first overall pick on a guy who can adjust to the speed of the NFL. This dude doesn't look anywhere close to the player that he looked like when he was playing at the University of Alabama. And I know a lot of Panthers fans will say that Bryce Young wasn't good at Alabama neither. He was overrated, but the version of Bryce we saw at Alabama is not the version of Bryce that we've seen in the NFL. And when you give up so much draft capital, you've mortgaged so much of your future on one guy, and he pans out to be the worst quarterback ever to be drafted that high. You're pretty much in a situation where you may not be able to dig yourself up out of this hole, at least for the next couple of years. You can expect the Panthers to continuously be drafting high in the next couple of NFL drafts, similar to what you see with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars have constantly missed on quarterbacks. Although Trevor Lawrence is probably the best quarterback that they've had in recent memory, they still haven't gotten that far because they're not a good team when it comes to drafting. And when you continuously miss on the draft, especially at quarterback, you're always going to be drafting very highly. Look at the Cleveland Browns. Yeah, they hit on Baker Mayfield. They got rid of him, and they're right back where they started again, stage one, trying to find a new franchise quarterback, because they're going to most likely be picking top 3, top 5 in the draft next year. There is a consistent trend with teams that can't figure out the answer to the long-term quarterback woes. They always are consistently drafting high. And the Carolina Panthers, with the dysfunction that they have with their owner being somewhat of a Looney Tune, he has said that he's going to chill out. He's going to kind of take a little bit of a backseat, but we'll see about that. But getting Bryce Young just completely set back the Carolina Panthers franchise several years. And we could see a situation where the Panthers become the Detroit Pistons of the NFL. The Detroit Pistons, these dudes suck every single year. You probably can say they might also be the NFL's equivalent to not maybe the Detroit Pistons, but maybe the Charlotte Hornets, who are in the same location pretty much. So you got two franchises, and the Panthers and the Hornets, that just continuously miss on draft picks because they can't get the most important positions right in order to have success. And when you miss in the draft like the Hornets and the Panthers have, it continuously sets back your franchise. And this is why the Panthers are in such a messed up situation with Bryce Young. Because when you missed on him, when you could have had C.J. Stroud, You just nuked your franchise because you traded away Christian McCaffrey also, and that draft pick that you got in return for trading away CMC, you used to also trade up to get Bryce. So essentially, you trade away DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, 2 first-rounders, and a few second-round picks to get a guy who is worse than Jamarcus Russell. Drafting Bryce Young, when you think about what the Panthers had to do to even be in position to take this dude, it has nuked this franchise. A lot of you Colorado fans are really delusional about Deion Sanders' future with this program. So a few days ago, I released a segment titled Why Deion Sanders is Going to Leave Colorado After This Season. And it's getting a lot of backlash because a lot of Colorado fans are calling it clickbait because Deion has came out several times publicly and said that he isn't leaving Colorado, even though he said the same thing when he was at Jackson State. Remember, at Jackson State, he said that he wasn't leaving Jackson State. He was trying to build something special down there. God put him there for a reason. Just to up and leave with all his Louis luggage to Boulder, Colorado. So if Deion Sanders lied about not leaving Jackson State, what makes you think that he's telling the truth about not leaving Colorado? There has never been a single coach in the history of college football that's been upfront about their future when it comes to staying or leaving with their current program. There are coaches every offseason that always deny rumors about them leaving for another job just to leave and take that job anyway. It's not the first or last time that a coach will lie about their future. Why is Deion Sanders going to be honest about his future in the middle of the season? If Colorado ends up having a 10-win season or they win the Big 12 title, Deion Sanders is definitely going to be up on out of there. But most likely, they're going to win anywhere between 8 to 10 games this year. And when that happens, you're going to have schools that are going to be interested in Deion Sanders' services because the thing with Deion Sanders is that Colorado, yes, he does want to win here. He does want to turn this program into a potential national championship contender. But that's if he doesn't get any opportunities from bigger programs elsewhere. Because the thing about Colorado that makes it hard to win here is that, first of all, it's really hard to recruit in Boulder. As beautiful as what that city and state is, it's not easy to entice recruits to want to play in Boulder. It would be a lot easier for Deion Sanders to sustain success and build up a championship caliber program if he takes one of the Florida jobs that potentially could be available, rather it be University of Florida, Florida State, or UCF. All 3 of those programs give Deion Sanders a better chance to win than what he has right now at Colorado due to the location in Florida. It would give him easy access to Florida recruiting, which he already knows the area pretty well because he is from Florida. He already has a lot of good relationships with high school coaches in the Florida area, especially Southern Florida. So leaving Colorado for any of those Florida jobs that come available would definitely be an upgrade for Deion Sanders in terms of his ability to have a shot at winning a national championship. Not saying he can't win a national title at Colorado, but it's a lot easier to do it elsewhere. Just because Colorado is a Power 4 job doesn't mean that it's as good as a job compared to other schools, because Colorado has limited resources compared to schools like Florida, Florida State, UCF, who have shown their commitment to football, who have shown their commitment to dishing out however much it takes to get top talent out of high school. And right now, Colorado currently has the worst recruiting class in the Big 12. I don't think the recruiting struggles are indicative of Deion Sanders' recruiting ability, because Deion, the past 3 years he's been a head coach, he's flipped 3 of the biggest recruits out of high school. Jordan Seaton was the #1 tackle in America last year. He flipped him. He flipped Travis Hunter. He flipped Cormani McClain. So if Deion Sanders can flip these 3 guys, he can recruit any of the best players in America. However, at the same time, even though his name is Deion Sanders, and that means that most recruits are going to give him an ear in terms of being recruited to go play for him. But at the same time, certain recruits aren't going to want to talk to you no matter who your name is if you don't have enough money to entice them to want to listen to you. And Deion Sanders has had plenty of press conferences where he has said that NIL is really pivotal to having success in college football. And if he goes to Florida State or UCF or Florida, he will have more NIL money from his NIL collective at those schools to get some of those big time recruits that he's been trying to go after that Colorado has come up short of getting. The reasoning for Deion Sanders to leave Colorado is not that it's a P4 job. It's because it's a power forward job. However, there are other jobs that give him a better chance to win and win at a higher, more consistent level than what he could possibly do at Colorado. Colorado's program has a ceiling on it. And from a historical standpoint, Colorado has never been a program that's consistently recruited at a decent level. It's not easy to win at Colorado, hence why Deion Sanders is having more success now at that school than what they've had since the freaking 90s. It's hard to recruit, which makes it hard to win there consistently. And it's incredibly going to be hard to turn that program into a national title contender. Deion Sanders also is somebody who loves being in the spotlight. He loves all the attention being on him. Being at a school like Florida State, where he made himself a household name at, would definitely have college football buzzing. And everybody always talks about Colorado now, but imagine if Deion was to go to FSU. People wouldn't stop talking about Florida State football. People wouldn't stop talking about UCF or Florida if Deion were to take those jobs. Those jobs are better because they have more resources, which makes it easier for Deion to win. I don't get why it's a hot take that a head coach who inherited a 1-win program turns it around to an 8-10-win program in only 2 years. It's unfathomable for him to take another job once this season concludes, when we've seen this several times in college football. Why are you guys trusting Deion Sanders' words? All of these coaches always lie about staying at their current program just to go elsewhere. Kalen DeBoer said he wasn't leaving Washington, up, jumped, and left early January after national championship to replace Nick Saban down there in Tuscaloosa. So I don't get why I'm getting so much hate and backlash for my opinion that Deion is going to leave Colorado. People just want to make it seem like this dude hasn't lied about committing and staying at a program long term before. He said that when he first got to Jackson State, he wanted to build something special. He wanted to not only help Jackson State, but the rest of HBCUs kind of be talked about more. And instead, he up, jumps, and leaves and takes a job at Colorado. So if he left Jackson State for Colorado, what makes you think that he wouldn't leave Colorado for anywhere else if he views it as a better opportunity? You see, Jackson State for Deion Sanders was a stepping stone. It was an opportunity to show that he could be a solid head coach in college football. And he proved that with the success that he had in a short amount of time at Jackson State, which is why he got the Colorado job. Now, the Colorado job is another stepping stone, another opportunity to show that, hey, I ain't no fluke. I was winning at Jackson State, and I'm winning in the Power 4 conference, so that means that I can win anywhere. I can win in the SEC. I can win in the Big Ten. I can win in the toughest conferences in college football. And I can win having less. But if you give me more, I can dominate. That's why it isn't crazy to see Deion Sanders leaving Colorado after this season. Look at the recruiting. If Colorado was really going to be Deion Sanders' long-term destination, the recruiting would be much better. You don't have this low of a recruiting class if you don't plan on leaving after the season. And the thing about recruiting is that when recruits commit to Colorado, they are pretty much getting recruited, and they are committing to Deion Sanders because Deion Sanders is the program. Wherever he goes, he's the program. The recruits are going to follow him. The players are going to follow him most likely as well. Anywhere Deion goes after this season, Jordan Lewis, or not Jordan Lewis, but Jordan Seaton is going to follow. If he flips Juju Lewis, Juju isn't flipping to Colorado. He's flipping to Coach Prime because he's going to go wherever he goes. So Deion Sanders isn't tied to Colorado for the long term if he doesn't want to be. But there are a lot of schools out there who are going to have head coaching vacancies eventually. And Deion Sanders is going to be a top target for a good amount of them because they can give him more resources and they can pay him more than what he currently is getting at Colorado. Just because this dude has come out and said that he's going to stay at Colorado, he isn't leaving, doesn't mean that he's going to stay, because we've seen plenty of times with Deion Sanders, he say one thing and then does the complete opposite. Not just with him, but with other coaches in the past as well. This is just how the coaching carousel works, because nobody's going to be upfront and honest and say in the middle of the season, oh yeah, like I'm going to leave for a better job after this season concludes. Nobody says that.